Christmas was a big thing in the family. It was about two things: being together with good food, but also sharing Christmas with others. The moment Christmas hit was always the 1st of December, which happens to be also my birthday. That's where we were allowed to play Christmas carols, and where my grandmother would bake her Christmas cake, which I actually still do in her memory. It's technically a stolen Betty Crocker Christmas cake adapted to Palestine. So it has dates, it has figs, it has dried apricots, and all the Palestinian spices. It's cardamom, it's ginger, it's allspice. And then she would do humongous quantities. That fridge of hers would be full of them. She'd drop them, they'd always be done in a log, like a flat rectangle, and then she would drop them and put them in the fridge from the beginning of December until Christmas Day. But I would help her set the table, and then it was about the gifts. So she made it a point that she gave out gifts on the 24th lunch to everybody who was here. So they were very symbolic gifts. It wasn't about the value. Christmas was about generosity. The Arab Women's Union wasn't about food only, wasn't about culture only. It was really an era of what Bethlehem women did. All of these ladies, the ones that work here, the ones that volunteer here, created something very special. And today I'm breaking two rules for Teta's Kitchen. This is actually the first time I've been here. We had the condolences for my late grandmother up in the hall there, and that was the last time I went into this building. But also, when the PLO came back after Oslo, the first time I met a PLO official was here with my grandmother. Every prisoner that was jailed during the first Intifada got to their jail cells, in the Israeli occupation cells, a sweater, a blanket that was donated by these women. Some of them spent hours at home knitting, and they really taught us this giving out to people, not charity, but feeling solidarity with everybody in the Palestinian society. We have to always remember that the Tetas are the ones that kept this society alive and the memory of our food and our culture alive. فؤاد، شكرا انه استقبلتينا اليوم.
اهلا وسهلا محلكم.
الاتحاد انا بعني لي كثير.
انتوا من الاصل.
لا، انتوا كلكم الاصل البنتو.
وستك من الاصل
انتوا كنتوا وما زلتوا الي انا رمز ببيت لحم. رمز العطاء، محبة بيت لحم والاكل الطيب. يعني هلا احنا قاعدين هون المطبخ تبعكم جنبنا شامين ريحة اشي زاكي. حبيت انا هيك تحكي لنا شوي اللي بتذكره انا. انتوا بديتوا كم من ست كنتوا، وبديتوا بشغل بسيط وكبر وبنيتوا. بحب اعرف منك انت اليوم شو بعني لك الاتحاد؟
الاتحاد انا، لانه انا لازم كل يوم اثبت وجودي فيه.
أنا بتذكر وأنا صغير كنت آجي هون مع ستي، أدخل من هذا الباب ألاقيكم أعداد كلكم هون، في منكم من كل نحاء بيت لحم، كان من كل عيلة، من كل حمولة، من كل في حدا. وكان أحلى إشي إلي أنا كطفل لما آجي هون وتكونوا مطبخين إشي يوميتها الصبايا الستات وتكونوا قاعدين تتذوقوا وأسمعكم. أنا تعلمت المطبخ منكم، من ستي مطبخها بالبيت، بس كمان من الاتحاد.
تطبخ انت؟
معلوم. بتعرفي انتوا علمتونا اشي، انا بحكي على حالي وبلكي على ناس ثانيه كثير. هون بالاتحاد علمتونا انه الواحد مش دائما لازم يشتغل مشان مصلحته، بس لازم يشتغل كمان مشان البلد، مشان الناس.
اللي بده يشتغل لمصلحته ما بنجح. لما انت بدك تشتغل اشي عمومي وعطاء هون بتنجح.
انتوا سويتوا اول مكتبه ببيت لحم،
بيت لحم،
اول بركه ببيت لحم،
مزبوط،
اول مدرسه فن ببيت لحم،
كله
يعني انتوا كل شيء بتسووه رائدين فيه.
مدرسة المعاقين
مزبوط كمان، صح صح.
ما خلينا مشروع، والتطريز والمتحف وكله.
اول متحف بفلسطين متحفكم.
بالضبط.
هذا
اهلا وسهلا.
انا كثير مبسوط اكون عندكم.
احنا كمان بنشرفوا.
محلكم تشتغلوا شغل جميل كثير لاي حدا بحب الاكل، بس اي حدا بحب اللحم كمان.
اكيد.
في ريحه بجنن. شو عم تطبخ؟
اليوم عم نعمل سمبوسك لحمه، بنعمل كمان مناقيش بزعتر مع زيت بلدي، وبنسوي كمان طبله صفرجل قطع.
اسمحي لي ازور معك المطبخ؟
اكيد
طبعا. تعلموني اسوي سمبوسك؟
اكيد، احنا سياستنا اصلا يكون المطبخ موجود لكل الناس، اي حدا بيجي بزورنا بيشتري اغراض بيكون المطبخ مفتوح، بيشوفوا عشان ياكلوا بثقه انه كل شيء نظيف وكل شيء مرتب وبنشتغل بدقه. اهلا وسهلا، تفضل.
يعطيكم العافيه.
احنا بنعمل المناقيش اللي خبرناكم عنهم، بس اليوم عاملينهم بطريقه الرول.
اوكي.
نعملهم مدورات، بس اليوم حابين نعملهم رول. وعاملين كمان سمبوسك لحمه، وهي عينه جاهزه هون هي هون موجود جاهز.
لو انه بتقدروا تشموا الريحه، هاي الريحه هاي ريحه طفولتي. كنا نحكي مع ام فؤاد اول، كل وصفه هون هي فيها لمسه من كل ستات الاتحاد النسائي. What they're doing, some of them have been here. قديش صار كنتوا هون؟
20 سنة.
20 years.
أنا بالنسبة إلي 20 سنة، 21 يمكن. إبراهيم. سمية 37. 30 سنة.
ما شاء الله. They're part of the place. They're part of this heritage. When we started Teta's Kitchen, we were talking about Palestinian cuisine. How do we preserve it? How do we transmit it? What they're doing is transmitting it to every home in Bethlehem. Without gloves, without anything. This is fabulous. هذا انا رجعتوني 25 سنه لورا. سؤال، احنا اللي عم نسويه عم بحكي كمان انا قصه ستي. احنا علمتنا النفس بالطبيخ، النفس بالعطاء لبيت لحم، للارث تبعنا. الكم شو بتتذكروا من عبد الله؟
كل خير والله بنتذكر منها، كانت معطاء، كانت تساعد
محترمة، عقد حالة، فهمانة، شاطرة،
معطاء،
مدبرة، معطاءة، كانت تساعد الأسرى، تساعد الجرحى، تساعد الفقراء، تساعد كل شيء.
هلا هون في السبانخ والسفيحة. بتحدى اي حدا بالعالم يسوي سبانخ زي هدول،
نسوي كثير
الكبير والصغير. Food connects us. Heather, we met 5 years ago in a hotel where you were working and I was a customer around food. And
Yes.
here we meet 5 years later around food. So I have a question for Khat. I'm not the manager of the Arab Owners Union. What's your favorite food from the ones you do at the Ittihad?
Everything we do here is delicious, and I love everything we do here.
It's the most-
I have to think because everything is delicious. Maybe our kubba is special.
Your kubba with lemon or with yogurt?
Lemon for me.
My memory of my Teta is with yogurt. Now let's go to her house. This is going to be difficult on me but I owe it to you to explain why we did Teta's kitchen. We're going to visit my grandparents' house, and this is the first time, or actually the second time in 12 years that I come to the house. And Khalo Abdullah has been the fantastic guardian of the memory, because I think my grandmother and grandfather impacted all of our lives, and they left this legacy like we saw at the Arab Women's Union, but this is really intimate, and I am thankful to Khalo, to my mother, to my Aunt Pauline for allowing us this moment. Look at this cedar tree. It's fabulous. And everything here is a memory. I'll tell you a little secret. We're not in the right season, but my grandmother used to like one type of flowers, which are daffodils that grow wildly. And they would grow there. My uncle, before he moved out, used to live in the flat downstairs, and he would pick them for his mother and for himself. 12 years later, when I go to his office or to his house, he has a bunch of them there. And I think this is really what legacy is about, but there's something else. We brought something with us, which we had with the women. Hello?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, they're
The smell.
hot. Huh? Fresh.
It's Teta's recipe. Nothing changed. Shall we go in?
Yeah.
The only thing I'm missing in this room is the phone that used to be here. Because my grandmother would sit here and pick up the phone, and that's where she would be doing her calls. So she would call the Arab Women's Union, she'd call her daughters, her son, she'd call grandchildren, she'd call all of us from this phone. But then she also kept like lots of stuff here, papers, her phone book. Pictures, of course. I mean, look, wherever you go, pictures. It was her, this archiving thing was like totally her thing. That's Abdullah Dabdou, my great-grandfather on my mother's side, and his British Mandate Palestine passport. And my great-grandmother Victoria. You know, I mean, you open anything and there's more treasures. A Palestine kafia. I mean, that's my grandmother. You'd have a lot of farmers that came before going to the market with their produce here to offer to her. And she would bring them in, they'd have a coffee, and they'd talk about the food. And then she'd buy some. But it gave the rhythm of the season. It was the season of Beledi cheese, the season of prickly pears, the season of olives. I mean, everything had a season, and we celebrated this season. My memory of my grandmother sitting here is very funny because it's in two times. It's her wearing her nightgown in the morning with her cup of coffee, and then her, after she got ready to go out or to receive people, totally dressed elegantly, sitting here, doing her last calls, arranging. She was good at like micromanaging everybody. Come with me. One memory that just popped into my mind. When I was a kid, my grandmother used to fill this drawer with sweets. And I'd come and steal the sweets. This is as it was. Nothing changed. The reason we came back here was them. My grandparents always wanted the best for all of us, like any grandparents, I would say. but they taught us how to love this place. You know, Bethlehem is not an easy place to be in. The occupation, the challenges, the society that's not easy also. And they just instilled this in our being. My fight to preserve Palestinian food comes mainly from wanting to celebrate it in its diversity. I am tired of seeing Palestinian food being monolithical. It's not. We are a fabulous society. We are as rich and diverse as this house, as the memories that it has that were given to me.
So you basically learned to cook in here, right?
Yeah. I learned to be more precise. I learned to serve here and to cook there. The stove's always been there, not here. And this was a little bit my little cupboard of breakfast, because this is where she had the zait, the za'atar, the jam, the apricot jam, the quince jam, and the dibs and tahiniya. And I would sit here as a kid and have breakfast while she was cooking. So I learned cooking here. I actually have things to help me tell you some of my favorites. Crème caramel, done in this. That's her original ones. I never managed to do a crème caramel this thick and flip it over and have the caramel go down perfectly like she did. Her roast pan. She used za'atar, garlic, and she roasted lamb or beef. I mean, this doesn't exist anymore. You can't get any dishes that are this thick. What she would put here is lamb cutlets, garlic, a lot of garlic, pepper, salt, allspice, and then olive oil, of course, very good olive oil, and then some chili. And that's something I cook at home when I miss my grandmother. This, for me, is the magic pot. So I hope I don't break it. We would peel in the evening oranges, clementines, put them here and force us to eat them for our vitamins.
You were very, very close with your grandmother. And that was how it was for me. My mom's mom, when I lost her, was brutal.
You're going to make me speak about something very painful. My grandmother had cancer. She was operated on and the cancer was removed. And then a few months later, she relapsed. And I traveled to India with my father. She was okay when we left. Then my mother called us a few days later and said, "Come back." My grandmother waited for me to die. We got back in the evening. I went to see her. She was unconscious in the hospital. And she died that night. You say you don't deal with how central your grandmother was in your life. That was my case for the first 40 days. I helped out as much as I could. My grandfather, my mother, my aunt, my uncle, the family. Took care a lot of this, in Palestinian culture, when somebody passes away, there's these first 3 days of funeral and condolences, which are quite engaging. And then 40 days later, it hit me. And in my cooking, in my daily life, in the way I deal with people, it's a lot her. Dealing with the loss of a grandparent that's so central in your life, I think we all have different ways of dealing with it. I personally choose to celebrate her. I choose to remember her, and it's not a chef's story saying I was influenced by my grandmother, because we all say this. I think today what I've shared with you here just is a tiny tip of the iceberg of what she meant to me and what she's left with me.
And when she died that day, I got the text from my parents that it was imminent. I just went and rented a car and drove straight to Maine, and it was the same thing. She held on until I was in the room, and like 45 minutes after I got there, she died. And it was intense, like the whole experience. And I did the same thing. I cooked for my parents, I cleaned their house, I did everything. And it wasn't until weeks later that it hit me. And it was New Year's, which for her was a huge thing, the cognac and all this stuff. So it just all came out that night, and it was crazy.
I think it's our way of dealing with things, where you and maybe it's because of them actually. They've ingrained in us such a sense of responsibility that at the most difficult moment where you've lost that person that's taught you this, it just kicks in. It kicks in and you're doing things. I mean, when I remember myself during those first few days to start with, I don't know how I did it. I really don't know. I like, when I think of it rationally, like, but how could you survive that and deal with it while you had all these emotions in you that you weren't letting happen? And actually, I make peace with it by saying what I was doing was just doing what she taught me to do. Was be responsible. Like, you know, she wouldn't snap her fingers, but I could feel her snapping her fingers and saying, don't lose sight, don't lose your compass. Now, this has to be done, and then we'll deal with the rest after. This is where she used to keep a lot of stuff. She used to keep the jars of olives, of oil, like here, and then on the stairs, and the samna, and the jubna baladiyya, all of the stuff that makes Teta's little pantry, like, you know, a toy store for me. But there's one thing, she used to archive a lot of the city's history, a lot of the family's history. Before she passed away, she arranged a lot of the documents, she was doing them, and some of them are kept in this trunk. Like all the documents, this is my grandmother. That's about the Arab Women's Union, 1973. That's the building we were in this morning. And that's a book she wrote in Arabic, لكي لا ننسى, so that we never forget. This is invaluable, this memories. She left before her work was finished. She's, for me, when I light a gas and I start cooking, it's because of her and for her. You know, now we're talking and I can hear her pots clinking. It's so powerful that 12 years later, this is still so painful and yet so beautiful. Because if I'm still in Bethlehem, it's because of her. If I put up with the shit of the occupation and with the difficulties of being in the Palestinian areas, it's because she taught me that these stones are more important than all of this. She built this house with my grandfather. They built it together and lived in it. If you've noticed, similarity. That stone looks very much like the stone of the building we were in, the Arab Women's Union. It was a period in Bethlehem where people built, and they built to stay here. I think it's everybody's duty, and maybe us as Palestinians more, because of the difficulties we live of our existence being threatened, our identity. You know, when people say you don't exist, I just feel like telling them, you know what, let me take you by the hand into my grandmother's house. I don't need to justify that I exist. I've existed, we've existed before you, before anybody else, and after everybody else, and we're all human beings that exist together.
A lot of, at least for me, and it feels similar for you, that a lot of what I feel like I inherited, particularly from my grandmother, more than anybody else in my family, was my own work is motivated mostly by love for the world and people and how fascinating all of it is, right? And I feel like this is something that I learned from her and something that gets passed down, and I feel like this is something that particularly like a strong grandparent is, teaches you how to live, how to be fascinated by the world, how to be interested and engaged.
Love.
Like, it's not just love of family, it's love.
No. It's love of the world. What you just said, love of the world, love of life. Yes, you're right. They taught us life. They taught us love. They taught us, as I was saying earlier, tolerance. But they also taught us not to forget. And if you remember her book I showed you, لكي لا ننسى, so that we never forget. It's not about forgetting 48. It's not about forgetting 67, because what she taught me also is Palestine is way more than 48 and 67. We were not shaped by 48 and 67, even if the world wants us to be shaped by that. Yes, the Palestinians made refugees, our property is stolen, all of this is part of our narrative. But it's not only this. I mean, if I could say anything to people who have been watching Teta's Kitchen and have been acting so much with positive stories with us, grab your phones and film your Tatas if you have them. Record your Tatas' voices. And I'll tell you one secret. I found a voice recording of my grandmother on the internet. And that's the only voice recording I have of her. And I still listen to it because I miss her voice. So if you still have your Tatas, don't make my mistake. Film your own Teta's Kitchen while they're still there. I think you have your closing scene. I hate your Jack. خلاص. People ask me, what were your grandparents like together? And I'm going to share a secret with you. This is where they got dressed. So my grandmother had a cupboard for her and a cupboard for my grandfather. And my grandfather loved her so much and trusted her so much, he never chose his clothes. She would prepare what he wore, and he always wore a three-piece suit, a shirt, and a tie. And when she passed away, like minutes after she passed away, the first thing he told me was, how am I going to get dressed? You see, more pictures. Pictures everywhere. I could spend my life here, actually, going through all of these pictures. That's my grandmother with Suhara Fat. Their pool, the Arab Women's Union had a pool, and it was the first mixed pool. And so there she's giving a prize to a girl. That's my mother. Wow. These are fantastic because they're mixed, like these are just, she stored them. She hadn't gotten them yet arranged. You know, these pictures, they just defy what people want us to be. That's my grandmother on a beach in a swimsuit, and this must have been early 40s, 50s. Ah, that's me. You see, that's the dining room here. Look at this is fantastic. That's me and my grandfather on the balcony outside. Very often on Sunday afternoons, I would stay alone with him and we'd sit down there and I would share with him his passion that day, which was reading French newspapers. There's so many of them, each one is a story. Do you want to see me as a baby? There we go. That's one of my Bibles. L'art culinaire libanais. So the first modern times cooking book of cuisine in the area was this one. And it was written by somebody called Georges Reyes. And my grandmother used it as a base because we didn't have a Palestinian cookbook. The copy I have is the one my mother has. Like, this was how you were taught food. Look at this. I mean, for me, this summarizes what we are. My grandmother with her grandfather having coffee, and if you see here, he was grinding the coffee himself. And then here, it's her again. You look at the difference of clothes with time. It went from traditional clothes to the 1930s. She was always a very elegant woman. Which is as it is. People like them who've marked us a lot as individuals, your grandmother, mine. Then we start trying to find how do we keep that connection? In what shape? Is it me cooking? Is it you filming? Is it telling a story? Is it actually telling the story of others or telling your own story? And when you approached me for Teta's Kitchen, I was so confused. Because if there's one Teta that I would have loved cooking with, it was her. So that's why I did Teta's Kitchen. Because I'm sure all these Tetas that we've cooked with have fantastic grandchildren.